Încă o dată, bună seara! Mulțumesc frumos, așa mai merge. Până ajungem la discuția cu Reuben Coulter, o să fim în limba română ca să fie mai fluid și să avem o discuție mai directă, după care I will switch to English și intrăm în discuția cu Reuben Coulter. Doar ca și teaser vă spun că am avut o discuție cu Ruben Marian și cu Reuben Coulter și a pregătit un exercițiu foarte, foarte fain pe care o să-l facem împreună în seara asta și mi-a dat voie să fac așa un mic teaser doar ca să vă pregătesc și să vedeți că lucrurile o să fie foarte, foarte faine și foarte aplicate, așa că nu o să ne plictisim și avem premisele favorabile unei seri foarte bune. Nu știu cum sunteți voi, eu sunt extrem de bucuros când am venit și am văzut sala asta cu așa de multe scaune. Suntem, după cum reușesc să număr, așa din ochi, aproximativ 100 de persoane. Nu știu când a fost ultima dată când ați fost voi la un eveniment de genul ăsta cu 100 de oameni. Vă mai amintiți? Parcă e istorie, nu? Și mai mult decât atât ne și vedem la față și asta deja devine mult mai friendly și e o plăcere să reușim să interacționăm, să ne cunoaștem mai bine. Vreau să-l invit alături de mine pe Daniel Lar. Daniel este cofondator împreună cu Reuben al Guild și aș vrea să-l invit alături de mine să ne spună câteva cuvinte, să ne dea așa o imagine macro a ceea ce înseamnă Guild, după care o să o invit pe Alina să ne povestească despre unul din proiectele pe care în cadrul Guild le dezvoltăm. Daniel?
Mulțumesc, Bogdan, și mă bucur să fiu aici. Vă spunem și din partea Guild welcome, bine ați venit în seara asta la Guild Talks. Acum, din câte știu, cei mai mulți sau mulți de aici ați intrat în contact cu Guild până acum și doar așa de curios mă gândeam, cei care sunteți într-un grup Guild în momentul ăsta, să vă ridicați în picioare, doar să fiți văzuți și să vă cunoașteți unii pe alții, pentru că mă tem că mulți nu vă știți, așa că hai să ne ridicăm în picioare cei care suntem într-un grup Guild. Super, ok, e o chestie secretă, underground, dar vizibilă. Mersi tare mult! Dacă vă vedeți pe stradă, vă rog să vă salutați. Și de ce suntem aici și de ce Guild? Și o să dau un citat care mi-a plăcut tare mult. Cineva spune atunci când... Și sună mai bine în engleză. Este cam așa. When the leader gets better, everybody benefits. Când un lider devine mai bun, toată lumea are de câștigat. Și de aceea suntem Guild. Pentru cei care nu sunteți în acest moment implicați în Guild, doar ca să înțelegeți care e ideea din spate, Guild vine de la cuvântul breaslă. Și erau vremuri în Europa în care, indiferent ce meserie aveai, dacă aveai o meserie, o făceai într-o comunitate. Și dacă erai pantofar și dacă erai croitor la Cluj, erai partea unei comunități. Și de ce? Deoarece meseria nu se învață doar în școală, ci se învață într-o comunitate. Și o comunitate există ca să ne ajute să creștem ca și profesioniști, să învățăm împreună, să ne inspirăm împreună, să ne ajutăm unii pe alții să învățăm mai multe și în același timp, împreună suntem o forță care putem face lucruri faine în afară și putem avea un impact. Asta e ideea din spatele Guild. În acest moment suntem 6 comunități care ne întâlnim la 2 săptămâni, citim cărți, dezbatem, ne distrăm și mai facem câte o ieșire. Am început la Cluj, cum ați auzit. La Cluj suntem câteva grupuri de business. Din acest an există un grup de doamne în business. Cele de business de la Cluj sunt pe antreprenoriat, pe management în IT. Și din acest an avem un grup și la Oradea și avem un grup și de medici Guild tot la Cluj. Așa că asta e ceea ce facem și motivația este că ne dorim pe de-o parte să ajutăm oamenii care sunt în business să putem să facem lucruri faine împreună, să creștem împreună și în același timp să avem un impact în afară și să fim de folos, să facem afaceri corecte, cu integritate și ceea ce mi se pare incredibil de fain e modul în care lumea și partea civilă din România se conectează și are un impact în afară. Cred că noi ca și români avem talentul de a fi câteodată cinici și dacă ne uităm în jur avem motive să fim cinici câteodată, dar atunci când vezi oameni care vor să facă lucruri faine, atunci când vezi că nu ești singur, e o motivație incredibilă să continui. Așa că asta e ce facem. Bine ați venit în seara asta la un eveniment Guild Talks, care este un eveniment deschis în care oricine din comunitate care dorește să vină cu noi este binevenit să aibă parte de informație, de inspirație și ne bucurăm pentru seara asta. Urma să spun, dacă lumea era normală, că ne bucurăm că am ieșit din criză. Singura problemă că am intrat în altă criză și începusem Guild Talks acum 2 ani și ceva, am avut câteva întâlniri faine și aici la Napoca. Am continuat cu câteva și online și după aia am sperat tot timpul ăsta că ne vom reveni la viața normală în care ne vedem față în față. Ei bine, ne vedem din nou, asta e primul eveniment public după pandemie. Acum, din nefericire, se pare că este o altă provocare aproape de noi, dar indiferent ce se întâmplă, credem că în astfel de momente contează și mai mult să fim comunitate, să ne ajutăm, să ne susținem și să fim inspirați. Și cu asta vreau să vă doresc o seară faină, mă bucur că sunteți cu noi în seara asta și așteptăm cu nerăbdare să fim inspirați în următoarea sesiune. Mulțumesc tare mult!
Mulțumim, Daniel. Alina, hai aici și spune-ne despre Guild Next.
Mă bucur tare mult să vă văd, mă bucur, sper să facem cât mai multe evenimente din astea și să nu mai avem nevoie de pauză. Dacă toți suntem la un eveniment din domeniul financiar, mă gândeam să vă prezint Guild Next ca pe o oportunitate de a investi. De a investi într-o resursă extraordinară. Vreau să vă întreb câți dintre voi aveți copii? Nice. Despre ei este vorba. Guild Next este dedicat special oamenilor care vor să investească în generația care vine după noi. Ne gândim la oameni care sunt deja în business, la cum să-i servim pe ei. Pentru asta sunt o grămadă de grupuri Guild despre care v-a zis Daniel. Guild Next vorbește direct tinerilor din ziua de azi. Adică liceenilor, studenților și oamenilor tinerilor la început de carieră. Așa că dacă vreți să vă implicați în Guild Next, vă așteptăm. Nu o să vă zic mai multe acum, vreau să mă căutați după eveniment, o să fiu afară și vă aștept la o poveste.
Mulțumim frumos, Alina. Vă încurajez să o luați pe Alina la o discuție face-to-face, pentru că Guild Next e un proiect foarte, foarte fain care investește în noua generație și ar fi păcat să nu dăm înapoi din ceea ce noi avem și din ceea ce am reușit să obținem, din ceea ce știm, din experiența noastră, ca să facem lucrurile mult mai practice pentru elevi și pentru studenți. And now I will switch to English because we have with us Reuben Coulter, and I will say some words about you, and after that I will ask you to come here. Reuben Coulter is a director of international strategy at Faith Driven Investor and Entrepreneur. He is also a trustee of Bristol City Funds, a pioneering investment fund in the UK. Prior to this, he was CEO of Transformational Business Network, a global impact investment network, and a fellow and is associate director for Africa at the World Economic Forum in Switzerland. He was also the founding CEO of Tier Fund Ireland, an international development organization, and chair of the Irish Humanitarian, thank you very much, Committee. He completed an executive master in leadership with Wharton, Columbia, London, and INSEAD Business School, and a master in public health at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. Reuben is here with us. He came here directly from London, and let's give him a welcome. And Reuben, please come here with me.
Bună seara! Did I do well?
So, Reuben, quite impressive, but I would like to go a little bit deeper, and I would like to ask you to tell us a little bit more about you and about your experience, your work experience. A little bit of history.
Great. So I like adventures. I like to travel. I like to explore. And I guess when I was leaving school, I had no idea what I wanted to do. My parents had ideas for my life. And so I ended up doing science at university and realized that I don't have much of an attention to detail. And I was specializing in molecular microbiology. So I was in completely the wrong career. You cannot get a career which has more attention to detail than microbiology. But I took a trip one summer. I was 18 and I decided to hitchhike across Mozambique and Zimbabwe. I don't know what sort of irresponsible parents let their 18-year-old do this, but mine did. And as I was hitchhiking across the country, I was just absolutely shocked. Mozambique had just come out of a civil war. The country was in absolute poverty, devastating. And as I traveled through there, you just see dead bodies by the side of the road, people who died of starvation or warfare. And I guess I came back from that trip and said, I have to do something about this. I can't just go into a science or a management consulting career. I need to do something that matters. And so having a molecular microbiology background, I decided that public health was the natural step. And so I focused on public health, studied in London, and came out of there and began working in humanitarian crises. So first job was to Darfur. During the war in Darfur, if you remember, back in 2004. From Darfur, I went to Liberia, just come out of war, and spent a number of years there. And so that first part of my career was in these crises places, trying to provide healthcare, education systems. But I realized essentially what I was doing was putting this Band-Aid on a car crash victim. The response that we were doing was important, but it was in no way sufficient. These countries needed economic development. They needed people to be lifted out of poverty. And our healthcare, our education was good, but it wasn't going to be sustained when we left. The budget for the nonprofits that I worked with was larger than the Liberian government's education budget. So our small British nonprofit was larger than a government and their response. And how on earth was this going to be sustained? And so I became very interested in this question of what does economic development look like in frontier and emerging markets? How do we stimulate that? How do we foster that? And that's a journey that took me then to the World Economic Forum. I thought because I'd been at the grassroots, because I'd worked on the ground, that probably the answers were maybe in the boardrooms or in the parliaments. And I spent a number of years there, and I can tell you the answers are not there. But the people who I came across while I was at the World Economic Forum, while I was at the Davos conference, were entrepreneurs. And just courageous men and women like you who saw problems and were trying to solve them in some of the most difficult parts of the world. And they were creating innovative and sustainable solutions, but they were alone. And the question I began to ask is, how could we encourage and support these entrepreneurs? What would it take to help these entrepreneurs succeed? And I joined an impact investment network where we said, we're not just an investor into you in terms of capital, but actually we want to build the ecosystem around you which will help you succeed. We want to put more than capital into your business. We want to give you access to our networks, to the markets, to our experience, our expertise. And that was just an incredible journey where we saw amazing entrepreneurs in agriculture and healthcare bring really innovative solutions in some of the most difficult parts of the world. So some people have a career path. I have a career stagger. I didn't plan it, but I guess the recurring question I've been asking is, how do I use what I've been given for the common good?
You said earlier about the success of entrepreneurs. What is your definition for success?
That's a great question.
I know.
I think our definition changes, or at least I found for myself, it changes as we grow older and hopefully as we mature. And so I guess in my 20s, I was very much an A-type personality. I want to achieve success in my career. I want to be known. I want to be recognized. And when I arrived at the World Economic Forum, of course, I thought this is the pinnacle of success. I'm on stage with world leaders. I'm talking to CEOs of large multinationals. And what I realized is most of that success was a facade. Most of what projected there just was not substantial. And I remember I sat in a session with a CEO who remained nameless, and someone asked, well, what will be your legacy? And he began talking about his business and the revenue, and I thought that's the saddest answer to this question I've ever heard, that he increased profit margins by this amount, that he grew this company by X amount. I don't want that to be my legacy. Surely there has to be something that matters more, that means more. And for me, I guess it's been about actually how do I help others succeed? I like to say with my current position, I am in the least important role that I've ever been in. I've got the smallest budget that I've ever managed. I've got the smallest team that I've ever managed. And yet I feel it's probably the most influential position that I've been placed in. And it's an incredible privilege to be in that position. So from external metrics of success, it probably doesn't rank very high. But from what I feel is important, I think it really ranks high.
I really like your perspective. So looking back, what are the best lessons you've learned from your career?
I think what we need is more courageous leaders.
How you define courageous leaders?
Leaders who believe in something good and are willing to take risk to achieve that. Most leaders are willing to take risk to benefit themselves and benefit their own company, but not willing to take risk outside of that. And so when I was at the World Economic Forum, if you visit the website, our slogan is improving the state of the world. And you'll see reports and initiatives being launched about tackling joblessness or addressing inequality. And I was in charge of many of these initiatives, but actually I realized over time that most of these were marketing. It was PR. And we were essentially the PR agency for large multinationals and governments. And there was very little follow-through. There was very little substance behind it. And the reason was most businesses were not courageous to take the actions they knew they needed to take. They feared that if they took those actions, there were consequences for their business, there were going to be consequences for their shareholders. A good example of courageous leadership is Paul Polman. He was the CEO of Unilever up until, I believe it was 2019. And Paul Polman said to his shareholders, he said, I am taking the long-term interests of this company at heart, and that may cost you in the short term. That may impact the stock price. And yet we're going to address sustainability and the circular economy. We're going to bring this into our business model. And I'm taking a long-term perspective on this. I think also Jeff Bezos, we can dislike many things about Jeff Bezos, but he takes that long-term courageous perspective of building a company and bringing about change. And I just think the world needs more leaders who are willing to risk it. And we see it at the moment with President Zelensky. The world just recognizes, here's a leader who's willing to risk himself for his country. That's not leadership that you find often in political or business circles.
Your career shift can be considered a radical one. Why do you choose to join faith-driven investor and entrepreneur?
So when I spent time working with entrepreneurs around the world, particularly in Africa, when I talked to them, I said, why are you choosing to do something so difficult? Why don't you go and work for a corporate? McKinsey would pay you a fortune for your skills, and yet you're choosing to be a social entrepreneur and tackle some of these big issues. And most of the time they said, well, actually, it's because of my faith, it's because of what I believe in that I want to do this thing. I want to do something that matters. And yet I realized that most of these people, if they went to their church or their mosque or their synagogue, they weren't recognized. They were seen as maybe a second-class citizen. They were there to bankroll the good stuff that the church might do, but their work wasn't seen as integral to their faith. And I realized there's this huge disconnect between faith and work. And so the question I began to ask myself is, imagine if everyone who had a faith, who believed that their job was to love their neighbor as they love themselves, began to think about this and implement it in their business, in their investment strategy. What would the world look like? And so I guess my role, my hope is that I can awaken this sleeping giant. And people who call themselves Christians worldwide manage about 50% of the world's wealth, trillions. Imagine if they began to invest aligned with their values. Imagine the impact on the climate agenda, what that would look like, the impact on inequality. As entrepreneurs began to change their business models and address these sort of things, it would be enormous. And we're beginning to see that happen. We're beginning to see examples of this take place.
You talk about uncertainty. What do you think we should, how can we prepare for uncertain periods like we face now?
Yeah, so the original question that Reuben and Bogdan were going to ask me was about the economic, political events and how they're going to impact our businesses. And I said, well, look, I can give you my opinions, but to be honest, I read The Economist, I watch BBC, I watch CNN. All of you do the same. So I can give you my opinions, but I'm not sure that it matters or it has incredible value. In fact, I remember back in 2007 listening to a panel of economists at the World Economic Forum, and they were predicting the future. And almost all of them were predicting a very bright, rosy future in 2007. The one exception was the economist Nouriel Roubini, who said, no, actually everything's going to go pear-shaped. Things are going to go bad very soon. And he was widely mocked for his opinions and views. So what I've realized is that most experts don't have any better idea than you or I of what's going to happen. And in fact, what the military does to prepare for this thing is they do scenario planning, they do wargaming. They say, we don't know the future is uncertain, but we can do scenario testing and see what the future might hold. And we've been doing it a lot with entrepreneurs, with investors, particularly in these times of crisis, to think, how can we prepare? What are the threats that are going to face us, and what threats may be existential to our businesses? But also, what might be the opportunities in this new dynamic, this new equilibrium, and how might we address and lean into those opportunities? So I thought tonight we could have an opportunity to put this into practice in small groups, try what might it be like to scenario plan ahead for the future.
Okay, so I think now it's a great time to switch to your serious game, okay? So I will ask you to introduce us to this game and go to the first round.
Sure, so we have limited time, and normally we would do this over a full day, and we're going to try and compress it into 20 minutes, so please forgive us. And normally we would take it through a number of scenarios, because of course the advantage of scenario planning is there are many possible futures. We don't know which one is going to happen, so we need to test multiple possible futures and prepare for a number of them. So in this case, we're going to prepare for a bad future. What happens if things don't get better, if this current crisis in Ukraine is not over within a few weeks, if oil and gas prices continue to go up? So I guess to kind of set the scene for this, to help us get into the imagination for this, I just love some of you to kind of call out kind of what might be some implications of if the scenario gets worse, economic, social, political implications that you might see. So just call out from the floor. Just raise your hand and you can just call it out. Hyperinflation, yes. More populism? More crazier leaders? This man has a PhD in crisis planning, so he can probably, he's written his PhD on this. Anyone else? Yes? Commodity prices go up, absolutely. We were in Egypt last week with Reuben Marian, and there's a real fear there. The wheat prices are going to go up. they import 80% of their wheat from Ukraine. The impact of that on the ordinary man or woman on the streets who eats bread every day for 2-3 meals a day is enormous. The last time that happened, we had the Arab Spring. Thank you. Anyone else? Ladies, don't be shy. Oh, Anna, I know your name, so I'm going to pick on you. Yeah, so there could be more refugees and workforce here in Romania. Everywhere in Europe, absolutely.
New projects on IT industry.
New projects on IT industry, yeah.
Because Ukraine was a big important player.
Yeah.
And they need to work for the companies from USA or from there.
Yeah.
More pollution and climate change.
Yeah, climate change, absolutely, absolutely. So let's get into groups of 5, okay? We're going to have about 15 minutes and consider what might this scenario look like, and pick a particular industry or sector which you can focus on to give it a little bit of definition, and consider both the threats and the opportunities which that sector, that industry might face if you face this worst case scenario. So find 4 or 5 people around you and get into small groups. We'll have 15-20 minutes and then we'll reconvene. I'd love to hear just some of the insights that have come out from your group. What have been some of the thoughts that have emerged? What are some of the threats, the challenges that you perceive, and maybe what are some of the opportunities? So who would like to share a little bit about kind of what their group has been discussing and some of the insights which they've picked up? Any volunteers, please? Hang on, we'll bring you a microphone.
Hello, so we are a group of IT people here. And on the list of opportunities, on the worst case scenario that could happen to our industry, the opportunity would mean more candidates for jobs here in Romania. Let's say more maybe women in the first phase that will be available to be hired here. Also more projects, like a colleague here he was saying that earlier. Also, for some of us, could mean an emigration to the West to be able to do that finally. We also identify an opportunity for the management boards where the gender equality will maybe even out more, so more women will be in there. Remote work will continue, and it will show that it still works even after COVID. One opportunity, but it's with an asterisk here, writing software for military purposes. Yeah, it's gentle, a thin line here you can discuss. What else? Cryptocurrencies and the usage or more projects in that field, in the crypto project. For worst case, we thought about the trust in the Eastern Europe outsourcing capability will lower for the West. Maybe they will think that outsourcing to Eastern Europe is still with risk if the war expands outside Ukraine. The impact on the software companies that had headquarters in Ukraine, they had to relocate a couple of times already. Stress for the workers, for our colleagues, for us, due to the war news, maybe lack of sleep, exhaustion due to, I don't know, more progression in more escalation in the war. Cybersecurity threats, the companies will have to tackle that even better, even though that could be an opportunity in the cybersecurity sector, more awareness and have how to be more proactive to evade them. Also, there were identified threats for the business continuity. How do you share the knowledge inside the team to be able to continue the work? And also, we thought about some threats that are not directly linked to my software industry, but let's say the impact of the birth rate being decreased due to the war. What will happen if an EMP will, an electromagnetic bomb will affect the grid? So we expanded on that, and that will be it for us.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Anyone have anything else to add from their group? Yes, please.
So it was a long list from the IT sector. We are a group here of legal, financial investment, financial consultants, and medical help. We identified some of those threats, but one of the threats which we discussed about was the threat to have leaders that panic and leaders that don't know how to react, so that will impact on the society immediately. And also, in connection with that, we identified the opportunity that in such times of war, leaders from all over the world can help other leaders to mitigate or to address their specific problems or issues that come out of this crisis by giving advice or sharing experience from previous situation in war zones. So that was one of the things which was different or more as a supplement to what you said. And something we did not discuss, but it just came to my mind when you said, I see the opportunity that the IT sector that we have here in Romania could finally find a solution that in case if such a bomb comes, they will stop it somewhere. So we really rely on you. But regarding to the matter of labor force, which you addressed like an opportunity, we also discussed it as a threat of unstable labor, unstable force market, because people might feel so much freedom to go away that it will be difficult for them to remain stable in a specific country or a specific area. And this confusion in the mind of employees or collaborators, it's quite bad for companies, and on a level of a society is also like anything that is too confusing. It doesn't get to good results. So this is us.
Thank you so much. Anyone else? Yes, thank you.
Hello. In our group, we choose the agriculture sector because we have some connection here. Sorry? Okay. Like opportunities, what we see in agriculture, we will have more labor force, mechanics, and execution. We will start gardening or agriculture at home, little bit, or we have a little bit of ground. The development of agriculture in Romania, we have a good start in the last 15 years, but we have a lot of space to increase fastest in the next time. And we will export more processed foods. It's an important point that we must to process more in our country and to export final food, okay? And another opportunity, healthy company will grow healthy in the next time. For medium and long term, for short term, evasion, okay? Sorry, my English a little bit, but I try to adapt. Sorry. Black money will be a problem for short term, but for the good businesses will be an opportunity for a few years. And many parliamentarians will resign. Will be a good opportunity.
That's a good
We'll
opportunity.
stay only some threats, what we see, the diesel could be a problem, lack of fuel or for harvesting and for seeds. Increase the price of bread, fertilizers, for example, they have triple in this period. Black evasion, we tell about it. Chaos will lead to a lot of opportunities, in my point of view, in our point of view, sorry. And the metal is affected. The price has gone up very fast, and will grow the prices of the machines and everything what is in this sector. But opportunities and challenges for all of us. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. And maybe just get one last viewpoint. Yes, please, up the front.
So we have people in the agribusiness here, and we kept it basic as well. Food, fundamental human need. Everyone needs food, universal as well. So as we saw, this is a real life problem that causes economic disruption. But the problem is that also the financial market may amplify the volatility. For Romania, we have a lot of agricultural potential, and we should ramp up capabilities. I don't know if we will be up for that in the short term. As we saw the commodity prices, you mentioned it, fertilizers, fuel, even the grain itself, it's very increased a lot. And worldwide, I think in the last 2 years we had a record increase in food price, 30%, if I'm not mistaken. Like last year was 20% jump, which is a lot. And the threat here is that is asymmetric. It goes to the most vulnerable. Because for us, it might not mean too much, but for someone might mean having 2 meals instead of 3 meals, or going to bed hungry. So we really saw that we should, as a country, seize this opportunity and try to produce more, not just for financial gain, but because there's a need. And unless somehow the need is met, people will starve in MENA countries, in like Middle East, and in places they can't produce. So basically that's it. But the greatest threat would be that would be the nightmare of famine, and then the social collapse and the political turmoil that can come from that.
Great, thank you. So on that rather somber note, one of the things that really impressed me when I was living in Liberia was, while I was there during the war, some businessmen began building a factory next to where we were staying. And I'm like, who on earth builds a factory in the middle of a war? So I went to kind of find out who was the owner, and it turns out it was owned by some Lebanese. And I'm like, well, what's your factory doing here? How on earth are you able to run a business in a war zone? And they said, well, we produce beer. All the soldiers want beer. And so we have agreements with both sides that they won't bomb the factory, they'll keep us safe because both sides want to buy from us. And I thought it was just such an example of entrepreneurial ingenuity that even in the middle of this crisis, these Lebanese entrepreneurs from halfway around the world saw an opportunity to expand and grow their business. And I said, well, how on earth do you do that? Because surely there's massive, massive risks. And I said, well, actually, that's part of how Lebanese have always operated. We've always operated in really risky areas where no one else will go. And we're able to be resilient because we have this network of trust. We have a kind of a common community where we lend to each other. And when someone's business fails, we step in to kind of back them and get them started again. And that allows us, essentially, it's a collective insurance policy within their community. And it was such a really interesting example of actually how entrepreneurs who are normally working by themselves can work together for the common good, which I was really amazed at. And I think there's some lessons there for us to learn.
Before we go forward, we want to ask we want to answer your questions. So please go to sli.do, use the code GuildTalks, and type your question there. And Reuben will try to ask your questions. So we will do the next exercise.
Yeah, well, I think what we'll do, because we were thinking about doing the best case scenario, but we probably have limited time. So I think the question I'd love to ask you is, what is your role as a courageous leader in this moment? How can you really step forward in the midst of crises for your employees, for your customers, for your city, for your country? And how can you build resilience within your business and within your community? So courage and resilience, what does that look like at this moment in time? So we're going to give about 10 minutes to discuss courage and resilience and how you might build that into your operating process.
Great. I will start with the first question that sounds like this. How do you think the war in Ukraine will affect European economy in short term?
That's a great question. I'm very reluctant to be a fortune teller. So I think it does depend on how the outcome of this war and what is going to happen. In my personal opinion, the most likely scenario at this stage, and I could be completely wrong, but is that we will reach a stalemate relatively shortly, where Putin realizes he can't achieve all of his military objectives in Ukraine and negotiates some form of peace settlement. And I guess my concern is that that is a temporary negotiation till he has ability to rearm and reassert his objectives. I guess speaking from Western Europe, there is a real desire that this war finishes soon from a political perspective. The British economy is feeling a lot of pressure because of COVID. It has overextended itself, and households are feeling enormous burden between rising energy costs, increased inflation, and that's putting a lot of stress on the poor. And we have already experienced Brexit not too long ago because of the enormous inequalities within the UK. And there's going to be enormous political pressure within Europe to actually get back to normal. And so I think that means that the European Union in particular is very willing to make concessions. So the short term, the rhetoric will be strongly against Putin, as we're seeing at the moment. But I think we could easily revert to status quo because of pressure from local people who are feeling the economic implications of oil and gas embargoes and other things. So I think we're going to experience continued inflation, continued pressure on prices, on energy prices. But we may also then get back to some period of normality for the next 3 to 5 years before another crisis emerges.
So we have to get used to it.
I think so.
The most voted question is, what types of investment do you recommend or not in the present or near future? And I like the end of the question. Please don't say, I recommend investing in yourself or read books.
So I'm a big believer in invest in what you know. You're more likely to make an intelligent investment if you're doing that. I guess I'm very bullish on the technology sector. I think although the technology sector has suffered enormous losses over the last few months, it is fundamentally changing the way we live. And there's some technologies which are so disruptive that even if they suffer setbacks in the short term, I think long term the potential is enormous. So personally, I'm very interested in the biotechnology sector. I have a healthcare background, so I have a little more understanding about that than other sectors. And the second is blockchain-based technology, particularly for emerging and frontier markets. In Western countries, we have, of course, legacy infrastructure, Visa and MasterCard. But in most developing frontier markets, that doesn't exist. And blockchain provides, DeFi solutions provide incredible opportunities to serve the poor and minimize transaction costs and provide financial services to the masses. So I think it's a really interesting space, personally, to invest in.
So the people who are in IT, they are happy now. So what type of money are safe now? Dollars, euros, lei, maybe?
So I'm moving a lot of my savings into dollars. Traditionally, it's a safe store of value. We recently did a podcast with someone who is an expert in the gold market, and he still believes gold is still quite undervalued and feels that as a safe haven, it is a great asset to have. I have some of my investments in cryptocurrency. Again, it's a small percentage. And for myself, that's an opportunity to learn and understand how cryptocurrencies respond in crises and to just watch the volatility of the market. So I certainly wouldn't recommend it for a large majority of your investments, but I think it's going to be interesting. It's going to play a bigger and bigger role in the future.
Okay, so related with this, where we should keep our money? Bank account, cash, stocks, crypto?
Diversify. Yeah, no, I think it has to be. I don't think any one place. I think we need to look at diversifying our investments, both geographically, industry, and then across different asset classes. I think it's the wisest decision.
What's your biggest fear?
I guess two biggest fears. I think one is, my fear is that my life won't matter. I want to, at least with the time that I've been given and with the gifts that I've been given, do something that really matters and makes a difference in people's lives. And really take risks to achieve that and take opportunities when they present themselves to me. So that's one at a larger level. I think the second is I'm a father. I have a 6-year-old daughter and a 4-year-old son. And I fear that I won't be a good enough father. And I think that's been a really interesting lesson to learn, because actually you realize that your kids, they don't know any different. They think that you're amazing regardless. And so I guess my challenge to myself is live into their expectations that they have for me. And really that comes down to spending time with them, listening to them, engaging with them. I had a really good conversation, just coffee earlier. One of the entrepreneurs in this room is building a business with his 11-year-old son. They started when they were 9 years old, and he said it grew out of, there you are, it grew out of the fact that he was traveling. He was away from home way too much. And he'd come home and he'd be tired and realize he just wasn't investing in his children and building that relationship. And so now they've got this project together, which is developing his son's skills. It's giving him an opportunity to share what he's learned with his son. And I'm sure it's giving him an opportunity to learn from his son, who is probably challenging him as well. And I thought that was just such an incredible example of leaving a legacy. It doesn't necessarily need to be something big and grand. It's, of course, what matters is we start close to home.
There are a lot of questions coming. And I think I will ask you to answer and send the answers through email, because I don't think in 5 minutes we will have time to answer all of them. What do you think about the construction and the prices of the apartments and houses this time?
In Romania?
Yeah.
I haven't tried to purchase anything recently. I can only speak to the UK and Ireland, where I'm from. And I guess where I'm from, house prices have been increasing dramatically.
Okay, let me give you a twist of the question. Considering that we have a war at the border, do you think the prices will go up or down in the near future for the real estate?
So I expect the prices will actually go up. You'll have just the cost of construction materials is dramatically increasing. And so I think that's going to increase prices. It'll be interesting to see whether Ukrainian refugees coming into the country remain, or whether they continue on to other parts of Western Europe, or whether peace does indeed return and they return home. But it's likely that there's going to be a significant increase in the population. So I would expect in Romania property prices increase. I know where I'm based, property prices have increased by about 15% over the past 12 months. And it's a real challenge. It's a huge challenge for young people trying to get their foot on the ladder, become homeowners. And that's going to be, at least where I am, it's going to be an enormous political challenge. because without young people feeling that they have an opportunity to build a life and create stability for themselves, they're going to want to move other places, and we're already seeing that pressure.
That's a good question. How can we convince you to move to Romania?
Well, there is a professor at the university in Oradea who is actively trying to convince me to move to Oradea. He is convinced it's heaven on earth. There's a lot of really good stuff here. I came for the first time last September and really enjoyed my visit. I didn't realize how good wine was in Romania. That is the best kept secret. You clearly don't export enough of Romanian wine to the rest of the world. And so that definitely alone would convince me to move here. But also, actually, I loved the hospitality, just the warm culture, the welcome that I received. My wife is from Poland, and we like to joke that the Polish and Irish are mostly similar. We both believe that the world is about to end. The biggest difference is the Poles believe the world is about to end, so they lock themselves in their houses, they save all their money, and they drink all their vodka. The Irish believe the world's about to end, so we just invite everyone in. Let's have a party. So it's the optimist pessimist. I feel that the Romanians are much more with the Irish here. You're optimists.
That's a great question. How does faith fit into this period and what you do? Faith. How does faith fit into this period and what you do?
In my personal life, or this period is in world history?
In this period, but also in your life.
Yeah, so I think it comes back to this conversation we were having earlier about courageous leaders. And there are certainly not enough courageous leaders around. And I would hope that for those of us who have a faith, that actually gives us courage. We realize that the world is bigger than just our family, it's bigger than just the bottom line of our company, that actually we have a responsibility for humanity, for our neighbor. And it's a real challenge to us of actually how do we step out and take risks for others? How do we have a vision that is beyond ourselves, a vision for our nation? And I think where we see these visionary leaders, we automatically respond. We want to get behind them. And I was just sharing that I come from Ireland, and we were one of the poorest countries in Europe right into the late 1980s. And our economy began to prosper. But one of the things that really gave us confidence was U2, was Bono. That we could actually believe that an Irish person could stand up on a world stage and be heard and have a voice and actually count. And for me as a young person growing up in Ireland, that gave me courage that actually I can step out beyond my comfort zone. And so I think as courageous leaders, it's saying, okay, how do I take the next step? And how do I actually encourage those behind me, around me, underneath me on that next step? So I love the idea of Guilds Next, that actually we can bring along the next generation. We've got something to offer them, something to teach them with what we've learned on our journey.
Which industries will be more affected considering this situation, in your opinion?
Anything that requires energy is going to be affected. And we were already kind of going through this energy transition. And I think it's going to be a really interesting question, kind of as we talk about the green economy, as we begin to make investments in this space, can we transition, and what is the price that we are willing and able to make as we make this transition? And I think that question is still up for grabs. So kind of what does that look like in Europe? Can we wean ourselves off oil and gas from Russia? Do we need to restart nuclear energy in other parts of Europe? So Germany has wound down its nuclear power plants. Does that make sense in this current environment? And are we able to kind of develop green technologies fast enough to support new industries to emerge?
Getting loans from the bank is a good idea in times of war at the borders?
I think it depends what you're going to use the capital for. And like the cost of capital is almost certainly going to increase. The Fed is raising its interest rates, and that will have knock-on effects. But again, there may be opportunities which it makes sense to borrow at that cost of capital. So I think that's a big question. But I do think that that we're going to see increased interest rates for the next couple of years.
Let's take the last question, and let's try to end in a positive way. If you were the president of Russia, what would you do? But what if you were the president of Ukraine?
There's a good reason I'm not the president of Russia or Ukraine. It's interesting. I think one of the sad things about Russia is how President Putin has weaponized faith and religious values to attack other people, to push an aggressive agenda and bring division and hate and discord. And if I was able to come alongside him and challenge him if these things are what you really believe, pursuing war is not the solution to that. And so from President Zelensky, I don't know. I think he needs to continue to stand up for his people, for his country. And I have to say, I'm a huge admirer of his courage in the face of incredible odds against him, that he's continued to persist.
Great. The last question, and this is really the last question. What is your plan with FDE, Faith-Driven Entrepreneur in Romania?
Yeah, so one thing that gives me a lot of hope is, as I travel around the world, meeting local leaders who say, actually, the time for our country is now. Global movements, we're headquartered in the US. We can bring ideas from other parts of the world. But actually what really matters is the capability, the local leadership in any given country. And when that exists, when that belief in your nation, Romania, exists, then amazing things are possible. And so our vision is really continually to find those local leaders and say, how can we serve them? How can we encourage them? How can we come alongside them? And how can we connect them with what's happening elsewhere in the world? Last weekend, Reuben, Marian, and I were in Egypt. And we met with entrepreneurs from Mongolia, from Brazil, from Kenya, from Belarus. And we were able to come together and learn from each other and encourage each other and figure out ways that we can actually support and build these networks. And that just gave me a lot of hope.
Great. I would like you to help me to thank Reuben Coulter for being here with us.
Thank you.